What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. Today, my main topic is going to be the wide receiver position and why, for the first time in a while, it may actually be the focal point or a focal point of the Packers draft, at least early in the first 2 or 3 rounds in 2021. And I know that seems maybe a little bit shocking after Green Bay didn't address the position at all last year, and everyone's been calling for the Packers to draft wide receiver, and it's sort of continued to be ignored to some extent. But I think there's a very logical reason as to why Green Bay will be going wide receiver somewhere in the first 100 picks. And I'm not saying that that's a lead pipe lock. I'm not locking it in as we're recording today, or as I'm recording today, and saying I'm guaranteeing that the Packers are going to go top 100 wide receiver, but I do think that it's very likely. And there's a few reasons that I have that opinion. So let me start off by saying and kind of going over a little bit of the Packers history here, right? So there's this overarching thought in theory that the Packers haven't given Aaron Rodgers this top tier weapon at wide receiver, and they have been hesitant to spend a first round pick and things like that. Well, most of that's complete BS, right? So Aaron Rodgers was drafted in 2005. Remember, they already had Donald Driver at that point. He was a very good receiver. And remember, Rodgers was still a few seasons away from actually taking over as the starting quarterback. But they had Donald Driver. In 2005, that same draft that they picked Aaron Rodgers, in the very next round, they selected Terrence Murphy, a wide receiver that looked fantastic, was set to be, I think, one of Ted Thompson's another really great wide receiver pick for him. Instead, unfortunately, he had the very early injury, which cost him his career. But they very immediately addressed that wide receiver position in the second round. Next year, 2006, second round pick, Greg Jennings. Next year, 2007, third round pick, James Jones. Next season, 2008, second round pick and first pick in that draft for them, Jordy Nelson. 2008, 1 round later, third round pick, Jermichael Finley. Then they took a couple years off, right? Because you can only have so many of these receivers. So they take a couple years off. 2011, second round pick, Randall Cobb. Then again, 2012, 2013, they take a couple years off. Then 2014, second round pick, Davante Adams. From 2005 to 2014, the Packers spent second or third round picks on Terrence Murphy, Greg Jennings, James Jones, Jordy Nelson, Jermichael Finley, Randall Cobb, and Davante Adams. And that was really kind of to set up the prime of Aaron Rodgers' career. They did everything they could during that time frame to give Aaron Rodgers high-end weapons, and every one of those guys, save for Murphy due to the injury, turned out at a very high level, especially in comparison to where they were selected in their respective drafts. So Green Bay did absolutely everything they could. And oh, by the way, there's a Sports Illustrated cover with Rodgers and all these guys on it, just showcasing the weapons that Rodgers had at that point in time. So Green Bay did this phenomenal job of basically consistently having the next guy up, consistently grabbing someone in the second or third round to develop and give Aaron Rodgers a major receiving weapon and kind of keep that position churning as time went along. In fact, up until 2019, so from 2005 until 2019, or at least when Rodgers took over until 2019, he had at least two of Driver, Jennings, Jones, Nelson, Cobb, or Adams on his roster through the entirety of that time frame. At least 2 of those players at wide receiver from the time he took over at starting quarterback up until 2019. In 2019 and 2020, he had Adams, and then, of course, your MVS, your EQ, your Allen Lazard, etc. That was the first time that he didn't have 2 of those players on the roster. And oh, by the way, 2019 was still a little bit of they were good on offense, but not great. But 2020, they still had the most points on offense and were the number 1 offense in the NFL. So this idea that they haven't exactly surrounded Rodgers with weapons isn't true. But it is noteworthy that 2019 was the first time they only had 1. And, granted, they still had arguably the best receiver in football, but I digress. The other thing here that's worth pointing out is that, as I mentioned, 2019, just Adams and then, the rest of that receiving core didn't have the main guys, if you will. But in 2021, as we stand right now, I'm going to pop quiz for you. Who is what wide receivers are under contract for the Green Bay Packers in 2022? Any guesses? What wide receivers for the Packers are under contract after this season? I'm not sure you know the answer because I'm not 1,000,000% sure that I actually know the answer. The answer is either one or none. I believe Chris Blair, the Flyer street free agent that they took a flyer on at the end of this past season as a futures type deal, per over the cap is under a 3-year deal. Spotrac has him as a 1-year deal. So I'm not 1,000,000% sure. I tried digging into it. I didn't really care. It doesn't matter if Chris Blair has a 1 or 3-year deal, to be honest. The point being is that it's either Chris Blair or nobody. So it's basically nobody, right? The Packers don't have a receiver under contract in 2022. Now, that's a little bit hyperbolic, right? Because it's almost certain that Davante Adams is going to get an extension done. And Allen Lazard will be a restricted free agent next year, meaning that they'll be able to lock him in around $2 million on a 1-year deal if they want to, which, spoiler alert, they will want to. So they're going to have almost certainly Adams and Lazard under contract in 2022. But as we sit here today, it is nobody, or maybe just Chris Blair. And, even if it is, Allen Lazard and Davante Adams, there's nothing else there that you have to really work off of. There's no young up-and-coming player. So going early for a receiver in this draft makes a lot of sense for that reason. And even, beyond that, Adams is going to be 30 soon. He's, even though you're probably going to sign him to a 4 or 5 year deal that probably sees the majority of that through, you want to start building that foundation again. Whether it's for Aaron Rodgers or whether it's for Jordan Love, you want to start that cycle over of making sure that there are plenty of talented top-end wide receivers on this roster because, one, if Aaron Rodgers does in fact start to age, or show any signs of decline, you want to make his job easier. You don't want to make it so that he's got to do all the heavy lifting when he starts turning 39 or 40. Or if you turn the roster over to Jordan Love, the worst thing you could do is put him on a roster with an aging Davante Adams and nothing else to show, like nothing else that's really going to help him out as he starts off his career. And remember, they're borrowing a lot from future caps to try to keep things together this season and try to make a run at a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. So it's not like they're just going to be able to go out in the free agent market and sign a top tier wide receiver, especially if they're paying Davante Adams a ton of money as he gets later in his career still. So it is important to start building this wide receiver position back up. This isn't just about now. In fact, I would argue it's not about now at all. I actually feel very, very comfortable going into this upcoming season with Adams and MVS and Devin Funchess if he shows that he's capable of a roster spot, Allen Lazard, EQ, and maybe even if you take a couple flyers on some late round guys. Like, I feel pretty good about that. They're coming off a season where they were the number one offense. But I do think, even with that being the case, Davante Adams had like 115 catches this past season. Do you want to know who the second most was? 33 catches for both MVS and Allen Lazard. 115 for your one, tied for 33 with your number 2 and number 3. That is a huge discrepancy. And you'd like to see that maybe diversified a little bit more. Now, to be fair, this offense rightfully runs through Davante Adams and Aaron Jones. Don't stack the box. We're going to shove it down your throat with Aaron Jones and to an extent A.J. Dillon, right? If you do stack the box and you're one-on-one on the outside with Davante Adams, we're going to take Davante Adams one-on-one all day long. You stack the box and you double Davante Adams, all right, we're going to get you with bootlegs. We're going to get you with MVS deep. We've got a variety of different things that we can do in that scenario too. That's how this offense is set up, to feature Adams and Jones. And honestly, if they started giving MVS and Allen Lazard more targets in that situation, or a rookie, whatever, you would probably start saying, and I would probably start saying, and everyone would probably start saying, why isn't Davante Adams and Aaron Jones getting the ball? This offense is set up with 2 alphas in Aaron Jones and Davante Adams, and everyone else is complementary pieces. Allen Lazard is your blocking receiver / possession receiver. MVS is your deep guy. Mercedes Lewis is your blocking tight end. Robert Tunyon's your change of pace, can block a little bit, can kind of find some seams and get in behind zones and find space and be the guy that kind of clears some things out and just is kind of, like I said, that change of pace guy. A.J. Dillon's your bruising running back. Like, it is Jones and Adams and then pieces that fit within the overarching scheme of this offense. And I'm a million percent fine with that. Now, I would like to see, an additional playmaker. That'd be amazing. But I can also understand, and again, going into the season, feeling pretty confident. But the Packers are a team that's consistently looking ahead and towards the future. And it's tough to say that not only would a wide receiver help here and now, potentially, especially if they're a dynamic playmaker in the open field, but it would be something that would be very beneficial for this team to have going forward. If MVS has a good year, they may not be able to pay him. So there's definitely some considerations that have to be paid as to what, how they can really build this wide receiver core moving forward, especially as Davante Adams starts to age. And I think as I kind of close things up here, I think the overarching thought may be, listen, I would like a wide receiver, maybe in the top 100, but corner and, defensive line and offensive line and maybe even linebacker are more pressing needs for Green Bay at the moment. And that's true. And I think that's honestly a fair point. And frankly, if you said that the Packers went in the top 100 with defensive line, linebacker, corner, or offensive line, I would say, yeah, that's probably a better use of resources. And I think even if they doubled up at corner or doubled up on offensive line or defensive line, I wouldn't be upset with that either. So they certainly have some holes to fill. And like I said, I think you can feel comfortable with wide receiver this season. But there is an issue with just saying, hey, we're going to, address wide receiver maybe a little bit later in the draft. In the last 5 seasons, there have been 99 receivers selected in rounds 4 through 7. 99 in 5 years. Basically 100, right? But there's one wide receiver that's really, been a star. And that's Tyreek Hill. And he was in those rounds because of off-field concerns. He wasn't in those rounds because of talent. He was there because he had the very clear and obvious off-field concerns. And Green Bay's not going to take a flyer on that type of player 99.9% of the time. So the next best in those last 5 years, rounds 4 through 7 at wide receiver, probably Darius Slayton for the New York Giants. The next best after that, Darnell Mooney last year for Chicago, Gabe Davis for the Bills, probably MVS for the Packers. You're not getting game-changing wide receivers. Now, the year before that was Stephon Diggs. They found him, I think, in the 5th round for Minnesota. The year before that, not much else, and not much besides Diggs the year, in 2015, whatever it was. So every once in a great while, you can find someone, but it's very, very rare. If you want to find a receiver that's going to be able to help you, as of late, far more often than not, you need to take one in the top 100. And Green Bay's gotten away from that. And since 2014, I listed all those receivers they take: Murphy, Jennings, Jones, Nelson, Finley, Cobb, Adams. Obviously, Finley was a tight end, but you get my point. He was a receiving tight end. From 2015 to current, the only top 100 pick they spent on a wide receiver was Ty Montgomery, who eventually moved to running back. They haven't addressed it. And that's why they haven't had that consistent next guy up at wide receiver since Davante Adams. So it definitely seems like now is the time to start addressing that position. Whether they do and how early they do remains to be seen. I will lead pipe lock guarantee you that Green Bay will draft at least one wide receiver in this draft. Lead pipe lock, guaranteeing it now, locking it in. But whether that's round 1 or round 7, it's tough to say. I do think it's probably more in that sweet spot, maybe somewhere rounds 2 through 4. But again, there's a big difference between rounds 2 and 4. So Green Bay, again, has some major decisions on how they want to address this draft. And a lot of it's going to be best player available within those positions: corner, offensive line, linebacker, wide receiver, defensive line, etc. But you have to keep an eye open for an early wide receiver in those top 100 picks, because it's incredibly important that Green Bay starts building that room back up. And without it, as Rodgers gets older, or if you transition to Love, they're going to need more weapons at that wide receiver position. That's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for checking out today's show. Andrew, Kyle, and Maggie are doing today's audio podcast, so make sure to check that out. They do phenomenal work every Friday. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.